This one I think is very interesting and very applicable because this is a situation that a lot of business owners are very, very susceptible to having someone steal this kind of money from them. For this week's tax tea, we are talking about a former employee of a university that is believed or allegedly has siphoned off or stolen $3.5 million from the university. And this has been going on for like 6 years. No one knew. Now,
first of all, what is this lady's title? Let's leave with this. What is the lady's title? What is her job?
I forgot what the lady's title was.
Director of Finance.
Okay. Yeah. So the lady was a director of finance. And this is something that hit home because I do think sometimes, accountants are reluctant to mention this, but I'm not a reluctant accountant. I'm just going to be honest about it, is that a lot of businesses, the person who ends up stealing is the person who's the accountant or the finance person, because there are no checks and balances for that person.
Yes.
I mean, and in this case, there were no checks and balances. And I'll be honest, I sit on the board for a university. And that was one of the topics that we talked about because we looked at a series of different universities that have experienced a similar thing where someone had embezzled and stolen money from the university, because there's a ton of money coming in. And for most business owners, when they're talking about, hey, there's a ton of money coming in and it looks like it's going right out the door, I'm like, well, do you know who that money's going to? Because if you don't know who that money's going to, then it could be going to someone that it shouldn't be. And it may not be to the scale of $3.5 million. It may even be down to the scale of like, hey, we were looking at one client, we were doing a spend by vendor analysis and asked the question like, why are you spending $120 a month on Netflix? I'm like, there is no Netflix account that is $120 a month. And he was like, oh, it's probably multiple accounts. And so I was like, okay, who? Because one is, this is a business account. I mean, this is your business. So whose account? And as they dug into it, they realized that the secretary was running like 4 of her family members' Netflix account through the business. And I'm like, talk about an awkward conversation.
Immediately fired. What is this nonsense? Like, I think, honestly, I think this is why, like one of the things that we've talked about in one of the accountability portion that you mentioned is so important. Like, just the reason why a lot of people that get away with this kind of fraud stuff are people that do the accounting, are people that do the finance, is because, like you said, there's no checks and balances. I think that's why it's so important. Like, one of the things that we talk about, even as people kind of get out of the small business CFO program and are like, hey, okay, fine. My business is growing. I'm ready to go find an accountant. That's one of the reasons why we have that whole checklist of what to look for in an accountant. Because a good accountant, right? A good accountant should be able to, or I guess a non-reluctant accountant, as you put it, should be able to tell you, hey, these are the things that you need to be looking for. Any flags you need to be looking for. These are the kind of questions you need to be asking me on a monthly basis as your accountant to tell me, for you to know, like, hey, are there red flags? Is there something that I need to be looking for? Like, there needs to be a set of questions as a business owner that you're asking your accountant that they should be able to answer. And that will kind of help you gauge, like, hey, is this person saying the right things? Like, hey, are they aligned with kind of what I'm thinking? Is there something I need to pay attention to here? Because as much as we talk about, like, we are extremely good at what we do from an accounting and finance perspective, the TL Turner Group is probably the best in my opinion. But I think it's very important to still have a sense of accountability, because at the end of the day, and this is something we talk about whenever we do the tax fees, Terrell, like, the IRS is going to hold you accountable. Like, nobody else is going to hold you accountable for your business. Like, you are going to be ultimately responsible. So I think it's extremely important as a business owner that you understand enough to be dangerous, and you understand enough to be able to ask your accountant questions where, like, if somebody says something, like, for example, that Netflix transaction, like $120 on Netflix, like, they need to be able to give you that kind of information. So then, like, you're running the business, you know what's coming in and out every day. You can then be like, hey, this doesn't really add up, or the math isn't really math in here. Like, what do we need to do differently? And I think a good accountant should be able to equip you with those questions so you know the right questions to ask and you know when you can identify if there's red flags.
Yeah. And what I will say is what we will include in the show notes is a link to the checklist that I was working on, because I've been seeing this happen more and more about embezzlement. So there's a checklist I'm working on of the 5 things that you can do to protect your money from being stolen. And I'm putting together these 5 things that every business owner should understand and do, so that we can include in the show notes. So if you want that checklist, there'll be a link in the show notes where you can click on that. You can get, hey, here are the 5 things to protect your money from being stolen.
Awesome.
So that is our tax tea of the week. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. Until next time.